want you to think about what that word means to you when you hear the word tragedy. And as you're thinking about it, I'm going to put up some of Aristotle's definition from his book, The Rhetoric, okay? And we're going to start with Aristotle, who wrote this in the 4th century BC. It's a chapter in his classic book, The Rhetoric. And he wrote actually quite a bit that we still have extant on tragedy. Unfortunately, we only have a small amount of what he wrote about comedy. Okay, so he says it's an imitation of an action. Okay, so the Greek word for that is mimesis. And it's serious, and it's complete, and of magnitude, which means it's a big deal. And it's in language that's embellished with artistic ornament. And he says it has the form of action, not narrative. And that's his way of saying it's to be a drama. Okay? And incidents arousing pity and fear. So as to purge them. He uses the word catharsis. Okay, and we'll continue this definition in a minute. Okay, but we're talking about this as a mode of the genre we call drama. Okay, so tragedy is one of the modes of drama. Originated by the ancient Greeks. This was part of their culture. And you know those old ancient amphitheaters that they have in the Greek islands? They even had one in Pompeii. Okay, this is where those tragedies would be staged. And if you could kind of go back in your mind, to, 380 BC, and imagine there'd be a weekend, say you lived in Athens, and there would be a week during the year when you would expect to celebrate one of the household gods that they had a name for. His name was Dionysus. You guys hopefully read about him in your Edith Hamilton. So, and he was one of the household gods that Athenians worshipped, as it were. Okay, and during the week devoted to Dionysus, and keep in mind, the Latin form of Dionysus would be Bacchus, the god of the grape, the god of the vine, and this is one of the gods associated with fertility. Okay, and so you would go as part of the devotional aspect of this week, is you'd go and see some plays performed at the amphitheater, and these plays would tie into your mythoi, your stories that are in the underlying fabric of your religion. Okay, just like today, if you're a Christian, your church might at Christmas stage a Christmas play with the little kids reenacting the three wise men. I don't know if any of you ever seen anything like that, but when I was a little kid in church, there was the Christmas play, and there was the shepherd, and we had, or even sometimes in some towns they have these nativity scenes with, some of them even will get live actors or people to dress up and stage a nativity. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Okay. So, and they'll have, churches might sponsor even sometimes during the Easter week what's called a passion play. And I remember back in the 90s, all the churches here in the valley used to stage during Easter a passion play down here at Libby Bowl, where they, stage putting someone on the cross and the whole deal. You guys ever heard anything like that? Do they still do that? They used to do it. The churches would get together and stage this passion play. And now here's the thing. If you go to church and they're doing the story of baby Jesus in Bethlehem and all that, okay? Ostensibly, the congregants, in the congregation know the story already, right? There's some star these guys followed, and, there's no room at the inn, etc., Or if you were to see a passion play, you know what's going on with the putting Jesus on the cross. You know the story. So the question is, if you're in one of those churches watching one of those dramatizations, why? What's the point? You already know the story. It's like going to a movie, you already know how it ends. So why would these organizations stage these plays? What's your thought on that? Just for fun? Just to give the little kids something to do? Yeah. Or does it serve a communal kind of binding kind of glue for the people there in the room? It's something that's a devotional activity, more or less, which is what these plays were for the Greeks. So when they would go see, say, the trilogy about Oedipus performed, the people knew the stories just as people in our culture know the story of the Garden of Eden. It's part of your culture's fabric. And so seeing this staged is a form of a devotional activity by the people there. Now, in ancient Greece, there were these contests, and there'd be, in a given year, 3 tragedians would be chosen to write 3 tragedies and stage these. And at the end, there'd be a vote, and the person who won the contest would be given a year's living expenses paid for, okay, by the city-state. You with me here? Jaron, you with me here? If you got a question, raise a hand. Okay. And we're not going to get through all this today. We'll get into more tomorrow, foundational material for you guys, for Lear. I just want you to kind of get a sense of where tragedy came from, okay? So now for the Greeks, this would be an all-day event to go watch one of these trilogies performed. You know how long it took you to read Oedipus. So, you'd probably see 2 in the morning. There'd be a satire kind of intermission, and then you'd see the 3rd one, more than likely. I mean, we don't know for sure, that they had 2 in the. I mean, I'm just kind of speculating on that. But you would go down to the amphitheater, probably with your significant other, and you'd have a basket with some bread and maybe some figs, maybe some olive oil, and hopefully something soft to sit on, and you'd watch these plays. Okay, it just is a devotional activity. So that's where the art form gets its start. And Aristotle, of course, was an Athenian who grew up watching these plays staged. And he grew up during that golden age of Pericles, when we had Oedipus, when we had Sophocles, when Sophocles wrote as Oedipus during that time, Euripides, when we had some of the comedian writers such as Aristophanes, okay? We had the great philosophers, not just Aristotle, but Plato, okay? And the formation of the academy, which is where we get our word academic, first school in Western civilization. So we're talking about a key period there in Athens. And Aristotle, in his rhetoric, he defines all the various forms of literature and rhetoric at that time. So he defines epic, he defines lyric, he defines tragedy. Okay, so with tragedy, he lists the 6 elements of tragedy, starting with plot. Okay, think of characterization. Okay. Idea or theme. Diction, which would be the words. Okay. What he calls the spectacle. And I would think of, if they had the masks, think of the masks, the Greek masks. Okay. They didn't have really a whole lot of costuming other than wearing robes, probably elevated shoes, and these Greek masks with exaggerated facial features so that people way up in the cheap seats could kind of see a general sense based on the mask of what that character's personality was supposed to be.
We actually learned about those masks in drama, and didn't they have like megaphones on them?
Some believe that, yeah, that they could actually, because of how they're designed, help the actor to project the sound. Okay, and then the spectacle, and I want to also mention melody, okay, which was for these ancient plays in the form of the chorus. Now, in Macbeth, the chorus is manifested in the form of the witches and their chants, okay? That's in my opinion. In King Lear, in my opinion, the chorus is going to surface in the form of the court jester, the fool, okay? So, which of these six would you guess would be the most important element? If you said plot, you're correct. Okay? Now plot. Okay, so there are going to be several elements of a plot. Okay, first of all, it's going to involve an important person. Okay, so we're talking like a king, an important warrior, a prince, okay, someone of that nature. Now, and Aristotle specifies this in his definition. And if you're going to adhere rigidly to this definition, that would exclude Romeo and Juliet from being a true tragedy, wouldn't it? Even though Shakespeare writes the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet, and his title, well, someone wrote it on the title page of the first folio, but Romeo, of course, just an adolescent kind of spoiled kid. Not a prince. No, he's from a wealthy family. Pardon?
His family's like well off.
Yes. So he's very, I don't know if the fact that he's from a wealthy family makes him elevated enough in Aristotle's eyes. So, and it's going to involve a fall of this person. Okay, fall from position. It's going to involve pain and suffering. And catastrophe, another really good Greek word for us, okay? Now, Aristotle gives us a couple other Greek words that I need you guys to know when we're talking about plot. He says the best plots in tragedy are going to involve something called the peripeties, or peripetea. And this is a sudden reversal of intention or course, okay? Sudden reversal of fortune, perhaps. You could also interpret it that way. So going from a state of grace to a state of being loathed, which is what happens to Oedipus, right? He goes from being an adored king to being the most hated man in all of human history, basically up to today, really. And the other plot element is anagnorisis. Let me hear you guys say that. So we got silent G there. Anagnorisis, which is a movement from ignorance to knowledge. And it's sudden and shocking, okay? So how I would define anagnorisis, it's a shocking, sudden disclosure of the hidden truth. Okay? Or you could see it as a shocking, sudden disclosure of the real person that's been hidden from you, that's kind of a species of truth, isn't it? All right? We clear on what those two terms mean? Peripetea, sudden reversal. Now for Aristotle, he says the best, most perfect tragedy is when these two things happen at the same moment. So if these are simultaneous, you got the best tragedy that should win the prize. If those two things happen at the same moment on stage. Okay, which they do in Oedipus. Let's talk about how that happens. So in Oedipus, which I asked you guys to read this summer, yeah, you guys stay with me here because I'm going to move quickly through this. So let's just review. I know you guys know the story, but one thing Aristotle says is if you got a perfect tragedy where you have the peripetea, the anagnorisis kind of simultaneously happening, and it's just all these elements are happening. He says Oedipus is the most perfect example of that, and he goes on to say that if it's really that kind of a play, you shouldn't even have to watch it. If you just tell someone about it, it'll create an effect on them. And try that. Tell people who haven't read Oedipus what happens in it, and watch their reaction. And you can't hear that story even summarized without wincing a little bit. Okay? So the problem starts off with over in a place called Thebes. And the problem starts with the king named Laius. And he has a queen named Jocasta. And he's a successful ruler, and she gets pregnant, right? Now none of this happens in the play, but this is the backstory that if you watch the play, if you went to the festival of Dionysius to watch Sophocles' plays, you would already know the story, so you don't need the whole backstory, you know. Maybe later he wrote a prequel, I don't know. But we know he wrote this. And so Laius does what any intelligent, responsible king would do in that situation. His wife's pregnant, and so what's he do? I heard someone say oracle. So he consults the gods. So he travels to the oracle at Delphi. So he goes to Delphi, and the oracle, here's what archaeologists think. Okay, they've actually excavated something they think may have been one of these places where there'd be an oracle, and they would have a virgin priestess that they would bring out and put into a throne or chair, and she would go into a trance and start babbling prophecies to whoever made an offering there. Okay. Some people theorize that perhaps there would be a pool even where the chair would be above that, and that there may have been some gases from the earth coming up that might have induced some visions. People have their theories. But at any rate, she'd go into a trance, and the oracle at Delphi tells Laius that your son is going to rise up and slay you, and he is going to father children by your wife. Now, I think we could all agree this is probably the worst prophecy that could ever be said about anyone, right? Yeah. So he comes back here and he says, you know what? This baby's bad news, man. It's gonna. And he tells her the prophecy. So as we know, here's what they do. They send the baby with a servant up to a place called Mount Cithaeron. So we have Mount Cithaeron. And this servant's instructed to abandon that baby up on the slopes and leave it to the elements. And Laius's point of view is, you know what? This baby, if this is the gift from the gods, we don't want this gift, give it back. Let it be food for the wolves. We don't want it, right? So right as they're up, the messenger's up there with the baby after it's born, and he's staking it down to the side of the hill there so that the buzzards can come and feast on it. he hears this voice behind him, says, "What are you doing nailing that baby to the mountain?" And then his servant turns around, and there's like a shepherd there, and he says, "That's way uncool, nailing a baby to a mountain. I don't, you know." And they start talking. And the shepherd says, "You know what? I live over in another kingdom called Corinth, and I'll take the baby. This is not the way you want to treat that baby." So he takes the baby over to Corinth. Okay, and now, of course, driving a stake through the ankles of the baby kind of maybe left it a little injured. And as the baby grows up, it's going to have a club foot disability. And that's what Oedipus means in Greek, is club foot. Okay? Wow. See, that's kids not getting the break, Anyways, this shepherd takes the baby to his king and queen, who happen to be, as far as we know, they're sterile. And the king's name is Polybus, and his wife's name is Meropa. And he offers the infant and says, "Here you go." And they raise the little baby as their own son, and he becomes a prince there of Corinth. Right? You guys remember this? Yeah. Okay. And they name him, of course, Oedipus, which isn't the most flattering name. So the day comes where he gets to be about your age. He's a young man of age, starting to feel his own. He's strutting around in Corinth wearing the royal purple mantle to show that he's royalty. And one day he's hanging out in a local taverna, drinking some ouzo. And there's some dudes down on the other end of the bar, and they're kind of snickering and laughing at him. And he's wondering what's up. Don't they know who he is? So he walks down there and says, "Hey, you see the purple? You don't get that?" And they taunt him, right? They're saying, "You think you're all that, you're wearing your purple like your royalty. We know you're really just the bastard. You're not the real son of our king." It's fighting words, aren't they? So he gets very angry, but it plants a seed, right? Gets him worried. So he goes and does what any young, intelligent man would do in that situation, and does what? He goes to Delphi and consults the oracle, and he hears the same horrible prophecy that Laius heard, right? You will grow up, slay your own father, and you will father children by your own mother. And he thinks, "Oh my, that is terrible. I would never want to kill my wonderful father, and I would never want to accidentally have sex with my mother and father." So he does this, right? He runs from this so that it won't happen. And he leaves. Now you can see a pattern in both the father and the son, can't you? And that is what we call hubris. They second guess the fate that the gods have prescribed and try to do an end run around that prescribed fate, don't they? Yes? If the gods are prescribing a certain fate for you, to try to outwit the gods is never going to go well, as we shall see. Okay, so he's traveling, and on his travels, he ends up at this crossroads. Let's draw a crossroads. Now, I want you to remember the crossroads because it's symbolic. So, think of the crossroads not just literally, but also figuratively, at a figurative crossroads as well. He ends up here, and it's kind of like, the five-way intersection down here at El Roblar, when it's like, who goes next, And, it's like someone says, you go, and then they go, and you almost have a wreck, and, someone flips you the bird. And so, anyways, there's another party coming this way, and this dude is also wearing the royal purple, okay? And so Oedipus is saying, "Hey, I have the right of way," and this party's saying, "I have the right of way," and they get into a fight, of egos, and it becomes kind of an ancient road rage, I guess you could say. This is ancient road rage. And there's a big tussle here, and Oedipus kills all these guys except for one guy who gets away. And we don't know about him, but he's like, fine, I showed him. I showed him. And Oedipus goes on his way. And as he comes to the outskirts of Thebes, he encounters the Sphinx, correct? And the Sphinx, importantly, you need to know, does not appear in Thebes until after Laius has been dead for some time. That's an important point. Okay, so the Sphinx has been basically terrorizing Thebes by not letting anyone pass who couldn't answer its question. You guys remember its question? It's a key question. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening? And the answer is what? A person, a man. And Oedipus, very ironically, is able to answer that question. He says, a man. Because in the morning a man crawls on 4 legs, and in the middle of your life you're on 2 legs, and the end of your life you're with the cane, you have the 3 legs. So the Sphinx, enraged, dashes herself onto the rocks. Thebes is released from the tyranny of the Sphinx. Okay, now why is that ironic? It's because Oedipus doesn't really know who he is, does he? But yet he does know the answer to the Sphinx's riddle, that it's a man. So I think that's ironic. So he's brought into town as a hero. Now, unfortunately, Thebes' previous king has been killed. And they don't know by whom. All they know is they think it was highwaymen at some crossroads killed the king. So they've been kind of without a king. Here's this guy who just defeats the Sphinx. So they say, you know what? You're perfect for our new king. So Oedipus is now installed as the new king in Thebes. And as he's kind of starting to get settled in the palace, he notices what? The widow of the dead king is actually not bad. She's a little older. Can we say that she's an attractive older woman? Okay. All right, so one thing leads to the next. They get together, and you guys know that he's fathers several children with this woman who's his new wife, his new queen. And some years go by, and a plague of sterility falls on the land, okay? Your livestock can only give birth to stillborn. The crops won't produce. Okay, people are getting sick. They're dying of starvation and famine. So this is where the play, the first of the trilogy of Oedipus begins, right? With the supplicants, the people of the town, going to the palace, begging their king, do something. We're dying here. This famine's been going on too long. Okay? That's right where the play begins, with the supplicants talking to Oedipus on the steps of the palace. And he does what? What any wise king would do in that situation? He consults the oracle. And the oracle tells him, you're having this famine because the Thebans haven't solved the murder of the previous king. And until that murder is solved, the sterility upon the land is going to remain, right? So, of course, and you guys read this in the play, he makes a grand proclamation. We're going to find out who did this. And if any of you are harboring information as to who did this murder, you must come forward or you'll be complicit. And he calls forth the fortune teller, or the seer, Tiresias, and demands that Tiresias tells him who did this deed. And Tiresias says, I'm not going to say anything. And he threatens Tiresias, gets angry, doesn't he? We kind of see anger in the Father and the Son. As a personality trait they both carry in their genes, it seems like, you know. And so he threatens Tiresias, and finally Tiresias says, it's yourself that you seek. So at this point, Oedipus thinks this is a plot to overthrow him by his brother-in-law, Creon, and he starts flipping out. And at that point, someone shows up, and it's a messenger from Corinth. And he says, I have a great message for the king. It's sad, though, but your father, the beloved Polybus, has passed on. And Oedipus and his wife are there. Wow, then the curse wasn't real. The gods weren't correct on this because my father died of natural causes. So he feels like he's released from this horrible fate. And at that point, things are kind of looking up, right? Until someone there recognizes this shepherd and says, hey, aren't you the guy I saw who I gave that baby to? Remember I was staking that baby to the mountain and you took it? And says, how'd that baby turn out? You know, and they start talking. And Oedipus starts asking questions to probe what they're saying here because it's kind of making the hairs on the back of the neck stand up, you know. And his wife, Jocasta, says, just let it go. Stop talking to these guys. And he keeps pushing it. Jocasta goes into the palace and she hangs herself because she sees that she experiences her anagnorisis a little bit before Oedipus experiences his. And at the end of the play, he opens the doors to the palace and sees her hanging, and he takes the brooches that hold his robe and puts out his eyes. It's an important motif there of the eyes, okay? Because the world at that moment has become too ugly for him to look on anymore. Because at that moment, he has literally gone. At that moment of disclosure, when the truth comes out that he was actually the one who did this murder. He was actually the one who married his mother. You know, when it becomes apparent who he is, what his real ethos is, the world, he can't even bear to look on it anymore. So he removes his eyes. Okay? At that precise moment, his fortune reverses, doesn't it? He goes from being a trusted, adored king to being the most loathed man. And he's exiled. Okay? So it's the same moment of recognition, of anagnorisis, that literally the moment the scales drop from the eyes and he can see the truth is the moment that reversal happens in the most shocking of ways. And that's why Aristotle holds this play up as the perfect exemplum of tragedy, okay? So now that we've recapped this, okay, a couple things to note, okay? First, let's go back to Tiresias a little bit. People aren't generally cheerful to hear what Tiresias, and for that matter, what the priestess at Delphi has to utter as well, okay? Because in a way, don't they kind of channel some knowledge or information from the gods? And the gods are seen, at least in these plays, as antagonistic to the humans. I mean, look at the prophecy to begin with. So these are people who are trying to run or flee from that utterance. Okay? The other thing to keep in mind is the crossroads. Tragedy places the tragic figure at a crossroads where he must make an irrevocable choice. And that's key. Okay? So the choice made here can't be undone. And if it's a question of a violent act, you can't unstab someone. You know what I'm saying? Okay? Now, the other thing that this plays, tragedy in general is greatly interested in the concept of identity. Who are you? What are you? Okay, so your ethos, okay, which is the outwardly known self. And as you guys are, I know we're getting a little restless here. What time we're out? We're out at 1:13, is that correct? So we got about 15? How are we on time? Okay. I think we can cover ethos. So this concept of ethos is the central concern of King Lear as you guys are reading it. Okay? Who are you? That's the question tragedy wants to ask. So the problem with ethos has to do with that the outwardly shown self that you manifest to the world is not stable. For example, the self that you show here in this class right now is probably not the same self that you show with your friends when you're just partying or hanging out, right? Or the self that you show in a job interview might not be the same self that you show when you're just chilling with your BFF, right? You know, you guys get what I'm saying, though? Yeah. We wear different masks, don't we? Okay? And the problem with that is, who's the real person then? Because we're always trying to get behind the mask of a person, find out who the real person is. And if it's not the same, and so here's the thing. What if someone actually is walking around showing a self to the outside world that is at odds with the hidden, unknown self? Okay, let's suppose that someone is the old checker guy at Vaughn's. You know, it's that same old checker guy, and he's always kind of cheerful and checks your groceries. But at night, he goes out and lurks in the bushes off the Ojai bike trail, and he takes people and slits their throat. Okay? Now stay with me here, okay? So outwardly, for the rest of us, we see that guy, we think, oh, that's the checker guy in Vaughn's. And that's his ethos, right? But his daemon, it's the unknown hidden self, is that at night he hides off the bike trail and he's killing people. He's a serial murderer. Yeah. The grocery clerk murderer. So we just see him as this harmless kind of Vaughn's checker guy. Now, but when he looks in the mirror, his ethos to himself is that, haha, they think I'm the Vaughn's checker guy, but I'm really just this murderer. So here's the point I'm making, okay? His known ethos to us is not the same as his known ethos to himself. He knows himself to be other than what he's showing us that he is, okay? Now let's say that the crime gets solved, all right? And we find out that this guy was committing these heinous crimes off the bike trail here. At that point then, his daemon, the fact that he's this murderer we didn't know about, flips and becomes his ethos, and now when we see his picture in the paper, we know him as the bike trail murderer, okay? Or the grocery store murderer. So his ethos has now modulated into a different thing. So that's what I mean when I say it's not stable. Now this should cause you some problems when you think about it. Because if this is true, what happens with us and our day-to-day actions? And what tragedy teaches us to do is to second guess all our notions of what's real and what's true, okay? So maybe it hasn't happened to you yet, where you find that someone you thought you knew, someone that you thought you trusted implicitly, okay? You find out someday you actually didn't know that person as well as you thought you did. Or you find out that the person you thought you knew wasn't really who that person is. I'm not going to ask for any confessions, okay? But I can tell you that's happened to me, all right? Or maybe you might someday be married to someone and you wake up some morning and you're lying there next to an alien. That's some scary stuff. You know, all those years, you know, the latex, it all looked fine, and then one morning you wake up and the latex mask is showing you the alien, you know, with the tentacles and, you know, and going forward then, I got to say, if this hasn't happened to you yet, where someone turns out to be other than what you thought they were, don't worry, it will happen to you. That's part of the human experience, okay? Being betrayed by someone you trust, or finding out someone was not real with you, okay? And what it does when you have that happen, when you have that anagnorisis, and your eyes are open to who this person really is, and you're, oh my gosh, you know, I'm married to an alien. The problem with that is going forward, how do you trust what you see? If your eyes, the external appearance of who that person was, deceived you. Okay? So what good are your eyes if they lead you astray and deceive you? Okay? So in tragedy, look for themes of sight, vision, blindedness, visual appearances, okay, are really important. And when you see these things show up in King Lear, your antenna need to go up, because that's a big theme in King Lear as well. Okay, tragedy teaches us situations and people are not always what they appear to be. Okay, and when we find out we were wrong, it's shocking. That's a key part of our definition of anagnorisis. So it's a shocking revelation of a truth that's been hidden, or a shocking disclosure of the daemon, when we get to see behind the ethos and see the hidden, unknown person. Okay? So let's tie this together. All right? The Greeks have a term for this conflict. And by the way, I want you to know all these Greek terms. Okay. Now, without me even translating this term, you can begin to see what it means. We see, is there a familiar root here? This is the plural for the word logos. So this would be the plural form. The plural of logos is not logoses, it's logoi. Okay, and logos means what? So we don't know what logos means. Logos means truth. Okay? All right? All right. So we have the several, and this is also a Greek plural word, which would mean conflicted. Okay? Things that are conflicted. So we have the several conflicted truths. Now, the problem of the self ties under this, okay, because if the truth about the person is not the ethos, or if the ethos is only partial truth, and I would hesitate against saying one of these is good and one of these is bad, okay? It's just that you can see one, you can't see the other, all right? So for the Greeks, this would fall under this umbrella of the dissoi logoi, that there's just as the self is got these seen and unseen parts that are conflicted, the same with the truth. You have the part of it you can see, and you have the part of it you can't see, okay? Think about that. So, better yet, think about, let's go back to the idea of a self. Think about a person like a coin. Okay, you can really only see one side of the coin at the time. The side you can see is the ethos. And what tragedy teaches us is that we have to expect that there's a daemon behind there that we can't see. And we can't see both of these at once. Now, someone asks the question, well, can you just have one without the other? You know, I mean, you could grind off the back of the quarter, but it's still got another side. Right? I mean, it's an impossibility of physics for a coin to only have one side. You guys get what I'm saying? That's a point that may help you to remember how the Greeks felt about the self, okay, or about truth. That if you see one side, there's another side that you can't see, but it's always there. And what the dissoi logoi is about is that on any given topic, there are at least two mutually exclusive truths that can be argued. Now think about this in terms of controversial issues, okay? If you're pro-choice, anti-abortion, or if you're pro-life, anti-abortion, and that's your truth that abortion is murder of a soul, etc., the other side of the coin there is the people who believe in pro-choice, correct? Which is an issue that's torn this country apart to a large extent. The problem is that you have that happening on any issue. There's equally mutual truths that people hold on a given issue. You could take the death penalty. Some people might say a death penalty is the only way you're going to ever have justice in the case of murder. And we'll continue tomorrow.